So I'm going to go through this paper today, and it's basically looking at cortisol and caffeine, and it gives one group of participants caffeine and the other placebo, and it exposes them to stressors such as mental stress, physical stress, so exercise, and then also giving them meals as well to see how this affects cortisol. Now, just some background, all of these individuals are coffee drinkers or caffeine drinkers. They drink about 450 milligrams of caffeine a day. For the study, they gave individuals 750 milligrams of caffeine for the day in 3 spread out dosages of 250 milligrams. In my opinion, that is a lot of caffeine, especially considering a Red Bull here in the UK is about 80 milligrams of caffeine. But you can get strong coffees, which I reckon are like 200 to 300 milligrams of caffeine. So I suppose it's like having 3 very strong coffees throughout the day. I want to talk about the results using these 4 graphs just because I think they're a great visual representation of the results. Starting with graph A, this is women and mental stress group. So one thing I noticed is that caffeine is actually increasing cortisol throughout the day for all the groups. So cortisol tends to be higher in the caffeine group. Now, I think this is quite a well-known and accepted thing that caffeine increases cortisol, but also it's quite interesting to see in the study. We also see that there's a big increase in cortisol compared to the placebo group when you see just after that post-stress area, that first little peak. Basically saying that, cortisol increased a lot more in those who had caffeine in their system. And I guess that makes sense because you imagine you're having caffeine, you're more on edge, you're more in fight or flight, but there's an even bigger increase in cortisol. So not only is your cortisol elevated from having caffeine, but it's also increased a lot by the stressor, or at least a lot more. Now, I love caffeine. I've had a coffee today, so I have nothing against caffeine. I think it's just important to note this in case, someone's going through a stressful experience or something. Lots of caffeine might not be the best idea. Next is post-meal. Now, they actually all dropped in cortisol in this group after the meal, so post-meal. But those who had caffeine, when they had their caffeine, it spiked the cortisol after the meal. But those who didn't have caffeine didn't have that spike in cortisol. So again, I guess caffeine and food can work together, which makes sense because it's kind of like 2 fuels, or you've got the jet fuel, which is like caffeine, and then you've got the normal fuel, which is food. And then I guess because you have that food, it's just increasing cortisol more. Again, these are just ideas and theories. And you can see cortisol just generally drops down throughout the day. Next is graph B. So this is women and exercise. So, cortisol went down after exercise, and then it seemed to go up slowly 40 minutes after exercise, which is interesting. And then after the meal, after the women exercise, both of them found a spike in cortisol, caffeine and non-caffeine, but the ones with caffeine spiked a lot more, which is interesting because we didn't quite see the same result in the men. Anyway, post-meal, it just gradually drops off and drops down throughout the day. Graph C here, very interesting because so not only do men have a higher response to the mental stressor with the caffeine, the placebo group seemed to have a bigger increase too. So both these groups of men had a big spike in cortisol from the stressor. Now, I don't know if this was because it's an easier task for women as opposed to males, or maybe men just respond more to mentally stressful tasks than women. I'm not really sure. So that's definitely very interesting data. Then you can see it kind of drops down, and then same with the female group. After eating, after the mental stressor, there was a spike with the caffeine consumption, but not in the placebo group. So again, food and caffeine seem to tie in. Now the last and final one is men and exercise. Now, when men worked out with caffeine, their cortisol went up, but when men worked out without caffeine, their cortisol went down. It also seemed that after both groups of men ate, after exercising, their cortisol actually went down when they consumed the caffeine/coffee, or it was a caffeine pill, but sorry if I keep saying coffee, and just gradually dropped off throughout the day. So I appreciate there's a lot there, which is why I kind of found it hard to be more precise with my analysis or my interpretation. But, the main things you can take from that is that if you're having coffee or caffeine, you're going to have probably an increased level of cortisol, and you just need to be careful with the fact, especially if you're doing a mentally stressful task, your cortisol is going to spike even more. Now, is this a good thing? It's kind of hard to tell. I would say maybe it's bad, but I mean, it also depends how well you respond to stress, whether that stress is going to help you. It might motivate you more to be successful at the task. it's all very interesting. But if you're just, have something happen to you that out of your control, maybe it's best to like lay off the caffeine. Also, there seems to be a difference in cortisol after eating if you've worked out or not. So that's important when you're considering having caffeine. And yeah, just like cortisol does slowly go down during the day. Anyway, like the main thing, again, I just made the point, but I want to go over that, you know, mental stresses and caffeine, more needs to be looked into there. But yeah, I thought it was an interesting study. I wanted to do more of a long form video. I'm not as good at these, so trying to get some practice in, but I appreciate you watching, and yeah, I hope you liked the video, and thanks so much.